Tonight we present a live broadcast of the Golden Age Radio Hour featuring L. Ron Hubbard's adventure story, The Crate Killer. He knew the ship would come apart. He knew the Earth 18,000 feet below might or might not again feel the steps of Jumper Bailey. But that was his job, test pilot. And that was his ultimate end, a crash. He listened to his engine and found the sweet song good. He looked at his wings and had misgivings as to their strength. Too bad this pleasant craft would soon explode all over the sky. 8 times he had hit the silk, much to the sly amusement of his brother lieutenants. A cat, they said, had 9 lives, and this last one had better be conserved. Jumper, they called him, and rightly so. The powers that be had thought long ago decided that the best way of utilizing Bailey's unique aptitude for bailing out would be to make a test pilot out of him. The injustice of it weighed upon him. He always got the questionable planes, like this new, untried attack plane. Habitually, he looked to his ring, his bull cord, and found it to be where it was supposed to be. His harness was in place. 18,000 feet below, his superiors were getting stiff necks, trying to catch the flash of sun on his wings. And Jumper Bailey delayed no longer. He hauled back into a mushy stall, tail pointing at the ground and nose at the sky. The attack plane hung for an instant like a model from a ceiling. Abruptly, it whip-stalled. The Earth tipped up until the rivets threatened to spill out of their beds. Straight down, wide open, the attack plane streaked toward destruction. The altimeter began to drop. 18, 17, 16. The ship could dive no faster. Basie eased the throttle a little bit. He glanced at the array of meters, which the engineers would read later on. He'd do it, even if she wouldn't stay together. The hangars were doubling, trebling in size. Men could be seen now. The khaki top of the crash wagon caught Bailey's eye. It better be ready. 12, 11, 10,000 feet. Oh, his head felt terrible. His ears were hotbeds of lightning. The hood over his head was all ready to slide back and let him out. Now, if the wings floated clear and didn't pin him down, that is. 8,000. 7. The ship sounded like 10 million cats in a fight. Both hands on the grip, teeth set with effort, but ready to open and yell. Bailey yanked the attack plane horizontal, still shrieking. The plane for an instant tried to hold its wings. Bailey felt the terrific force of the jolt. He saw the wings soar outward in a cloud of yellow chunks, sailing upward and backward. The fuselage lurched. The engine still on. The stripped hull raced downward again. Bailey fought through fogs of blackness and parted the red curtains before his eyes. He could see white faces straight ahead, which was straight down. He could see men scattering. Bailey unsnapped his belt. He had 1,000 feet, and that was little enough. He thrust backward on the hood. Air crashed into his hot face. He pried himself off the seat. He could see the grass, blade by blade. He forced himself up an inch at a time. It was hard work. The air was like a stream of bricks against him. The fuselage turned over. Bailey gave a kick. Tumbling like a ricocheting bullet, he bowled through the blue. He had no time to look for the ship. The Earth was right there beside him. He snatched the ring. Silk cracked as the pilot chute shrieked out. He sailed out in a wide arc and came swinging back down as though on a trapeze, and Earth slammed against his shoulders. And the chute laid over, trying to get away from him, towing him along the field, slowly rolling over. He seized the shrouds and spilled out the unwanted wind. Bailey sat down on the crumpled canopy and fished a cigarette. His hands were shaking, of course. He lit up and took a drag. A siren was yowling, and men were yelling, and boots were raising dust.
You okay, sir?
Cried the sergeant, much more excited than Bailey.
Okay.
Said Jumper, exhaling blue smoke. They took the chute harness off of him, and he scaled to the seat of the crash wagon, cautioning the driver to go slow. He did not immediately report, because that, he thought, was rather silly. On the way down, he had made some notes, he thought, but he could not now remember a single line of them. Stiffly, he climbed down and entered a small building. Several brother lieutenants opened the way for him, silently regarding him. Finally, Donovan said,
9 lives, Jumper.
That's the last one, isn't it?
Said Bailey with an apologetic smile. He noted that not one of them asked after his health, which would be a natural and polite question. No man ever rose to high places in the Army by repeatedly hitting his silk. It might be a tragedy for another man to come close to being killed, but where Jumper Bailey was involved, well, there was a limit to all things. Consensus said that Bailey all he had to do was look at the ship and it would come apart in the air. No squadron would have taken him into its complement because though airmen are never suspicious, still, you couldn't be too careful about a jinx. When the commercial test pilot had tried that attack plane, it had stayed together. But with Bailey in the pit, he took off his helmet, straightened his shirt, and went out to report. The attack plane was still burning in a circle of wing fragments. 3 civilians were standing glumly beside a railing. They stared at him, and one of them whispered, without knowing that Bailey could hear,
Damn it! It's just our luck. He's a hoodoo. They tell me anyway. Bails out on the slightest provocation. Never been known to stick to a ship.
Bailey cringed a little and went on, trying to pretend he had not heard. Things had quieted down considerably. 3 pilots were heading for the hangar to take off the nerve tonic after the crash. The major was seen to enter his office, and Bailey, at some distance, followed him. He passed the orderly in the outer office, seeing the major. Harvey was sitting down at his desk. Harvey was not exactly pleased. 2 things that happened that morning which had not been calculated to sweeten the major's temper. An inspecting colonel had discovered that 2 trucks bore no insignia whatever, and he had upbraided the major about it. And the major's wife had inadvisedly showed him a charge account bill she had accidentally run to 3 figures. Furthermore, this particular attack plane had been built partly due to specifications for attack ships the major had laid down, and it was, in effect, his brainchild.
Come in, Lieutenant. Come in and sit down. I trust you're not injured.
No, sir. I'm okay.
Now, just what was the trouble?
Bailey had been in Miami once when a hurricane had arrived. Just before its coming, the atmosphere had been very still.
I pulled out and the wings came off.
Yes, to be sure, the wings came off. Now, just when did they start to come off?
I came out of it and leveled off, and bingo, there they went.
Yeah, I suppose.
Said the major, dripping molasses.
I suppose that you couldn't have noticed anything else. You were probably busy pushing back the hood, getting ready to jump.
No, sir.
And it isn't possible that you were so occupied in locating your ripcord that you allowed her to go into past 9 Gs. I mean to say, Bailey, that...
No, sir. She was clean out of it when she decided to go.
Lieutenant, just why were you wished off on us as a test pilot, I don't know. I believe this is the 9th time you have left your ship, is it not?
Well, yes, sir. But
the first time, I believe, was you got caught in the fog over the mountains. And then you bailed out.
Yes, sir. I was out of gas and
when we went to look for the wreckage, we discovered that you were not over the mountains at all and that your ship had practically flown itself in, breaking only the landing gear.
Yes, sir.
I do not think there's any need to go rehashing the other fiascos. You've probably heard by this time that the United States Army has to pay out good money for planes, and that we hire good pilots to fly these planes, not to break them up. Do I make myself clear?
Yes, sir.
This afternoon, I was closely observing your flight, If you had brought the ship out smoothly as it should have been, there would have been no accident. But you jerked the plane into a horizontal line of flight and pulled her apart. It's a wonder you weren't crushed in the pit. More's the pity.
It came out hard.
Yeah, I thought so. It happens, Lieutenant, that you are assigned to this field to test newly engineered planes. There is unhappily no other pilot here assigned to this duty, but there is one more attack plane which will have to be tested. To give you the benefit of the doubt, we will see that the wings are considerably strengthened this time, and as soon as this is done, you will test the ship. I might mention that it is probably the last ship you will ever test, because as soon as I can replace you, I will ask for your resignation. Do I make myself clear?
Yes, sir.
You are a very bad for morale here, Lieutenant, and this is the only thing I can do. Very good, then. Hold yourself in readiness for another test next week. Make sure this time you don't muff it. Your last flight.
Yes, sir.
Said Bailey, miserably withdrawing. Another man might have grown sullen and abusive under the apparently unfair charge, but not Jumper Bailey. He had fought his way up through the ranks to his wings and bars, and they meant a great deal to him. But more than that, he respected the mandates of higher authority, considering them unalterable. He knew definitely that he himself was at fault. He knew that the pilot is the captain of his craft, and that the ship must not be deserted until the grate of the reaper's scythe could be heard above the motor's dying cough. He knew that he was referred to as the ace, because wherever he went, he brought down more than 5 planes. Each one of them the property of the United States. He knew he had cost his government something like $1 million, while he himself was worth, according to his insurance policy, only $10,000. He did not blame his brethren for steering wide of him, because he knew that while there is never such a thing as a jinx, a pilot can never be too careful. He realized that a test pilot must, from time to time, bail out to save his neck. But he realized also that test pilots, being considered as good as dead men anyway, are rarely accorded either glory or sympathy until they are turned under the sod. For 10 days, Jumper Bailey kept to himself, sitting for hours in the dark corners of bars, drinking exactly 9 drinks per day. There was a fascination about the number 9. But while he waited for the strengthening of the new attack plane's wings, events were in making at the field. The orderly sergeant had heard the major's ultimatum to Bailey, and the orderly sergeant, after the custom long standing in all armies everywhere, imparted the news to his mess. These sergeants mentioned something of it to their wives. And, via grapevine, it gradually came to the ears of Mrs. Harvey, who, still feeling ruffled over her curtailed accounts, barked it at the major.
It's all very well for you to tell me that you sweat your life's blood for this puny pay. You work hard, I don't think. You sit at a desk, passing out orders and playing the tyrant to your men, just like you do to me.
What do you mean by that?
It's all over the post what you're going to do to that poor Lieutenant Bailey. Talk all you want about his being a jinx, but for all your fine orders, nobody ever saw you risking your fat neck.
The damage was done. The words said for spite rankled along the major's breast. He would sit at his desk mulling it wrathfully. So it was all over the post, was it? So he was yellow, was he? So he sent men to do jobs he wouldn't do, did he? Damn that Bailey. A ladies' man, that's what. Test pilot be damned. What was it that a test pilot had that nobody else had? And the final upshot of this mental shelling was that the Major stood on the line in full flying kit the morning the new attack plane was to be tested. Fearing the fellow had gone crazy, the mechanics and greaseballs walked softly as they walked past the ship. Bailey appeared looking wistful, rolling the number 9 around inside his head. He saw the Major and stopped and gaped.
You going up this morning, sir?
You'll see whether I'll go up or not.
But, sir, this is my job.
Don't tell me what your job is. This ship can be tested with her gunner aboard. Get in the rear pit.
But, I mean... Yes, sir.
Bailey, with many misgivings, knew he was about to be shown how to test a plane. A captain or two had tried to argue the Major out of it, but Harvey was somewhat set in his ways. They doubted his courage, he thought. Then, as a matter of fact, nobody had been thinking anything of the kind. The Major glowered at Bailey. The Major was a good pilot, of course, fond of his prowess and vain about his reputation. Bailey could not help seeing if his ripcord was in place, ready to rip. Guiltily, he withdrew his hand from it. The ship took off with a rush, nosed steeply up, and began to scramble for altitude. The civilian observers down below grew rapidly smaller. The engine was running like a sewing machine. The strengthened wings knifed the crisp air. All was well. The big colored relief map of the world rolled out for Bailey's inspection. He folded his hands and tried to enjoy it, but he was jumpy, missing the control of the ship. Startled every time they struck a bump, the air became smoother as they went up. And then it was cold, and the earth was lost in a haze of unreality. 3 miles and more in the air, the Major leveled out and cruised a short ways. Getting back over the field, he turned and glared pugnaciously at Bailey, as much as to say, "I'll show you." Then, with attention to the business at hand, the Major went over the hump. Full gun and down. Amazed, Bailey stared straight over the Major's hood, over the engine, through the prop, and at the earth. For the first time, he was a passenger on one of these rushing dives, and he did not much care for it. Without the controls to think about, his mind was free to play with a multitude of lethal possibilities. Gripping the cowl like a lady on her first hop, mouth open, eyes bulging, Bailey watched the earth hollow out, watched the hills sweep back, watched the rivers spread themselves and ripple. His ears began to hurt, and he yelled a little to make them stop. The Major knew what he was doing. When he slacked off when they had reached terminal velocity and rode this streaking bomb like a cowboy sticks a plunging bronc straight down, wailing and yowling and braying at the tiny square which was the field far below. The cannonballs of old never traveled this fast. A freely falling body would have been left thousands of feet above them. Nothing could stand the racking torture of that speed. Nothing made of fabric and metal could stand the pull-out. 9 Gs it would have to be. 9 times the weight of the plane would slam the underside of those wings when the stick came back. The Major's 200 pounds of bone and muscle would suddenly become 1,800 pounds. And if he came out too fast, oh, moaned Bailey, the two of them would be mangled to lifeless rags by the invisible weight of gravity. And even if they lived through that, the wings might come off as they had before and send them plunging straight down without control, faster than a bomb was ever dropped. Bailey felt for his ripcord again and drew his hand away. He felt for the snap of his belt, as though to make sure he could part it in an instant, and hated himself for doing it. Bailey, holding hard, thought he smelled something. He sniffed again. Surely that couldn't be gasoline. A fine spray was streaking back from the underside of the left wing, like a veil whipping there. Bailey's eyes grew round and scared, staring at it. The vibration had parted the gas lines, and the fluid was dousing the cowl and the fuselage. Bailey screamed into the talking tube.
Something gas!
It was impossible to hear anything above the battering wail of the dive, but the Major saw it. His head turned to the left and stayed there an instant. The fumes were thick and suffocating. 6,000 feet up, not yet time for the pullout, but the Major pulled. The terrific force of gravity snatched the blood from Bailey's head. From force of habit, he yelled loud and long to ease the tension of his bursting eardrums. Almost unconscious as he was, he sat stiffly awaiting the crack and bang which would tell of the departure of the wings. But the jolt did not come. They were racing even with the horizon again, all in one piece. The Earth was still a long way off. A puff of blue flame rolled up like a bowling ball over the col, burst and streaked savagely back at the hoods. The plane went over into a slip, and for an instant the black smoke rolled clear. The engine was silent, but the wings were shrill. Paralyzed, Bailey sat where he was. Harvey stood up in the buffeting blast, face scorched, collar smoking.
Jump, damn you!
Bailey seemed to be in a trance. The Major fought to get Bailey's hood open from the outside and then suddenly gave it up, and with a despairing look and with one last pleading shout, seeing that Bailey was evidently incapable of saving himself, the Major went over the side. Harvey instantly shrank to the size of a walnut against the green. White silk bellied over him, hiding him. The roar of flames resounded in Bailey's ears. The left wing was a cloud of black screamers, interspersed with wicked green tongues. The searing heat pounded against Bailey's hood. The wing would be burned through in an instant. Bailey shifted the stick and kicked right rudder, putting the left wing down and slipping in that direction. The furnace blast was swept across the cowl again, and for a roaring instant, and then the right wing took the brunt, leaving its mate to smolder in a tatter of fabric. The all-metal fuselage, soaked inside and out, began to warp in the heat. Bailey pumped at his fire extinguisher and flew with his knees, dousing his firewall. His boots were ovens, cooking his feet. In spite of the fumes, he could smell his own hair burning. He turned on the foaming fluid, turned it on himself, and held the attack in its giddy, swooping slip. He brought down the tail and almost made the plane fly sideways. The whistle of the wings blended with the hiss of the flames. He could not see how badly off were his wings. They might drop from him any instant. Baked, broiled, seared, and fried, Bailey cocked a calculating, if singed, eye upon the runway. He went into a steeper skid. He let down the wheels with an auxiliary crank. The smoke was so dense before him that he could but dimly see the buildings ahead. He slammed the ship down to the earth. With his rudder, he directed the blackly geysering nose at the squat firehouse. Bricks raised up before him, and he stamped his heels on the brakes. A man in asbestos grabbed him and yanked him out of the pit. Chemical extinguishers sang louder than flames. They laid Bailey out on the grass. His boots were cracked and smoking, but his suit and helmet and gloves had spared most of him from the flames, and he was not burned, but only heated through. Presently, a being who trailed a wad of parachute silk dragged up to the now smoldering and surprisingly uninjured ship.
Is he all right?
Bailey, slightly knocked out and very dizzy, peered at the Major. Bailey's voice was jubilant, like a man who had just received a pardon 10 steps from the electric chair.
I brought her down. I brought her down, I tell you. And I didn't touch my ring once. Not once. Do you hear?